Welcome to the Matt Cuda Photography Podcast, a podcast that explores nature and wildlife photography in your own backyard and throughout the United States. Okay, welcome back to the podcast. In this episode, episode 5, I'm going to take my top 10 images from 2015. I'm going to explain a little bit about each photograph and why I chose them for the list. I want to say also that I think taking your best images of the year is good practice for any photographer because it gives you a look back at the year. Have I progressed? Have I moved forward? Have I stayed the same? Have I gone backward? It gives you kind of a distilled version of that year. We're going to go through how I selected these photos, how I chose them, why I chose them, what I did to take the image, and I hope that this is beneficial to you. I hope that it actually helps you to fine-tune your own photography, maybe give you some ideas, but I think it's a good exercise. I think it's something that we probably all need to do at one time or another. Without further ado, I just want to get right into it and talk about it. Now, if you have an iPhone, you may be able to see some of these images, but if you don't have an iPhone, go ahead and go out to my website and take a look at what's out there. I got a link in the show notes for you, and let's just get right into it. This year was honestly an incredible year. It allowed me to do things that I've never done before. It allowed me to get images that I've never taken before. The trip down to Merritt Island was absolutely fabulous. I just was able to really hone my skills and really experiment a lot, and it was really a great trip. I highly recommend it. The next podcast after this one, we're going to take a look at that trip to Merritt Island, and I'm going to actually have a kind of a travel log episode, and you can kind of see, what it's like, how to get there, all that good stuff. But I just wanted to say it's just been a fabulous year. I don't know if I can top it in 2016. I don't think it's possible. I'm going to do my best and keep providing these podcasts, and we're going to get through it. The first image, if you want to take a look at it, is an image that, honestly, when I took it, I knew it was going to be a good photograph, but I didn't really grasp it fully until I looked at it. And the thing about this image, it's of an American black bear. It's a tight portrait of the black bear. This is rapidly becoming my style. I really like to get in close. I like impact. There are other photographers that don't like that. They like to show the environment. And so you're going to start seeing in my style is this close-up impact of the animal. And really, I think portraits of animals and portraits of people really have a lot of similarities. This black bear photograph could just as easily been a photograph of a person, and I think it would have had a great amount of impact. If we look at it, what I tried to do here was I intentionally tried to crop out as much as possible and leave that bear staring into the lens. And it really is provocative. It's you don't know what the bear's intentions are. Is he curious? Is he upset that you're there? Is he thinking about his next meal? I don't know. But I really like the framing, the lighting coming in from the right on this photograph because of its semi-side lighting. The guard hairs on the bear are actually reflecting that light, and it's given us kind of interesting highlights in his fur or hair. His eyes, again, piercing. His right eye is kind of fading off into darkness, and I really like the light and shadow in this photograph. So this was my number one photograph of the year. It's been a very popular photograph. It was a finalist in the Outdoor Galore photo contest. It's been purchased many times this year, and I really like it. I think it really epitomizes my style. Just some technical background on this photograph. It was taken on August 15th, 2015. The camera I used was the Canon EOS 7D. This is the classic version, not the 7D Mark II. I used a Sigma 150 to 600 contemporary lens at 600 millimeters. That gives me an effective focal length of 960 millimeters because of the crop factor. My shutter speed and aperture was f6.3 at 1/100th of a second. My ISO was 1600, and I used a tripod. Now, one thing I want to mention technically about this photograph real quick before I move on is this was shot at ISO 1600, and you can hardly tell that it was shot at that. Sometimes, and don't be afraid to open that ISO up a little bit. Now, I don't like to go above 1600. That's kind of my limit. But sometimes you have to do it. Sometimes you can't shoot at 400 ISO or 200 ISO, and you got to crank it up. And this is a perfect example of that. And if I hadn't have done that, if I didn't do that, I would not have the image sitting here before me on my monitor. Um, and that's something to think about. I want to challenge you to not be limited by your gear, because let your creativity just happen. You know, let it become part of your style. Don't be afraid of a little bit of noise here, a little bit of noise there. It is what it is. You got to get the shot. I don't want to belabor that point, but it's just such an important concept, I think. So the next photograph, I labeled the call. Now it's a little deceiving here. This is a screech owl. It's perched in a burned out tree, which I think makes a fabulous background for it. But I think what makes this shot great is one, you have some impact because it is fairly close, but you also have some vocalization here. That the bird is actually doing some vocalizations, but he's also working on his breakfast. So he's working on a pellet, I think, up in there, and so it's a little deceiving. The call is probably a little deceiving. The other thing I like about this image is it's behavioral. I guess that's pretty much the same thing, but it's a behavioral image. So it shows a behavior of this bird that a lot of people don't get to see, and I think that's important. Um, this is often referred to as gesturing. The animal has a gesture. People have gestures. That's what makes us who we are. It's what makes the animal who it is, and that's part of what gives this image great impact. The other thing that's subtle but kind of interesting here in this photograph is if you look to the left, you actually have a gradient in the background. And this was shot in early morning with fill flash, but you still have that gradient in the background where the foggy morning is in the top portion, and it fades into a little bit of sunlight down at the bottom, so you can see just how early in the morning this really is. The fill flash gives us a little bit of subtle lighting on the bird, so you're not looking at a dark blob, or you're not getting a muddy view, which is common that early in the morning. I think if I remember right, this was taken around, I'm thinking 7:30 in the morning, somewhere around there, 8 o'clock, and I was in a wooded area, so it's quite dark. Some of the technical data on this image, it was taken March 20th, 2015. I was actually at a benefit for the Carolina Raptor Center, and they put on a benefit for photographers every year, and I highly recommend it. It's called Photo Wild, and you can go and photograph these birds, and you're given to a good cause at the same time. This image will be published in the January 2016 edition of Wildlife Magazine, so this one actually is published. The camera I used, Canon EOS 7D Classic. I used the Canon 70 to 200L f4 IS, and I'll tell you what, that's been a great lens. I don't own it; I just borrow it when I need it. The focal length's 200 millimeters. The aperture's f4, and the shutter speed is 1/125th of a second. ISO 1250. It's tripod mounted, and I did use fill flash. Again, another high ISO image makes the list. Again, you've got to do what you have to do to get the shot. Would have been better at ISO 100 if the lighting was there, absolutely. But again, we're dark, we're early morning. you're struggling to get 125th of a second shutter speed. Um, had I been at f5.6, which most lenses are, I would have been at a 60th of a second, and that would have been very, very low. I don't like to go below 125th of a second photographing birds, especially if there's any kind of activity going on. But let's move on to the third image. The third image in my top 10 is entitled Ruby-Throated Hummingbird in Flight. This is one of these images that it seems like people either love it or they hate it. I like it first because, first of all, it's a hummingbird. I mean, hummingbirds are a great subject. They're they're beautiful birds. Um, they're amazing birds because they can hover, go backward, up, down. And they're just cute little animals. I mean, they're just little loving animals. Even people that don't particularly enjoy birds oftentimes like hummingbirds. And so I can't I can't take credit for that. That's God's handiwork, not mine. But what I like about this image, besides the subject, is the two petunia flowers form a triangle with a hummingbird, and so you have these triangular leading lines that kind of take you from the through the flowers, through the bird, down to his tail, back up to his beak, through the flowers again, and this kind of gives you this little ping pongy, the viewer a little ping pongy view. The background's very clean in this image. It's green. It's actually, believe it or not, it is a real background. It's not a man-made background. So you have that green, you have the red, great contrast colors, Christmassy kind of colors. I think the green background contrasts well with, or not really contrast, but accentuates the green feathers of the bird. That iridescence that's common with hummingbirds is clearly seen here. But yeah, I love this image. Now, how did I take this image? This image was actually taken in my backyard studio. Three flashes were used in this image. There's a flash lighting the background. There's a flash lighting the bird and flowers from the left, and there's a flash at 45 degrees to the right. So it's a three flash setup. That's kind of tricky. It's kind of advanced, but that's what you have to do. Why do you have to do that? Hummingbirds' wings beat so fast that if you want to freeze them, as they are here, where you can see each little feather in the wing, you have to use a short flash duration. Because that flash duration is so short, basically it freezes the bird. My shutter speed has nothing to do with this shot. It's all the flash and its duration. This is almost completely lit by flash. There may be just a slight bit of ambient exposure in here, but not much to talk about. It was taken June 6th, 2015. It's a great time to photograph hummingbirds. They're very active this time of year. The camera, again, the EOS 7D. I used my Tamron 70 to 300 VC lens for this. The focal length was set at 200 millimeters. The aperture was f11 and 1/250th of a second shutter speed. ISO 125. It was tripod mounted, and I used multiple flashes. This is one of these images, like I said, that people seem to love or hate. To me, it's really a great summertime image. Maybe it's a little trite. Maybe you see too many of these. I don't know. I just really fell in love with it the minute I saw it on my display in the back of my camera. I fell in love with this image. I knew it was going to be one of my best of the year, no doubt. But anyone can take these shots. You don't have to have 600 millimeter lens. Any 200 millimeter lens will work for this type of photography. Actually, the Tamron SP does a great job. Another good lens for this would be the 70 to 200L from Canon. So get out there and anybody, like I said, anybody can do these shots. Hopefully that challenges you to kind of take your photography to the next level. The next image is an image entitled House Finch on Peach Branch. This image I really like. Now, I get a lot of likes on this image, but I also don't get as many as I think the photograph deserves. And it's not because I'm a great photographer, but because to me this image really epitomizes springtime. If anybody knows much about spring and how flowers bloom on peach trees, you'll know that they are one of the first blooms that come out for the year. And so this image shows that. You can tell this image isn't faked because um, the peach blossoms only come out when it's early spring. And if you look in the background, you'll notice that it's still very brown and lots of earth tones going on in there. So we know that this is spring. We also have a fairly common bird, but I think it's the house finch here is just a really good looking house finch, a good species. Kind of got a 3/4 angle on his back there. You know, we're seeing this bird really peeking out as far as his plumage goes, because this is going to be the time of year for the mating season, and so they have full breeding plumage. But I like it. From a technical perspective, I like it because this is really one of the sharper images in my top 10 this year. It was taken March 23rd, 2015. It was the Canon EOS 7D again. I did use the 70 to 200L for this image. Again, I highly recommend that lens. Awesome, awesome lens. It's at 200 millimeters. I shot at f8 at 1/250th of a second. ISO 320, and it was tripod mounted. Now, one comment I want to make here about close-up shots of birds like this, and that is, you'll notice that my aperture is at f8. If you can get away with f8, because if the lighting allows you to do it, go for it with these small birds, because you really need the extra depth of field. If you're at 5.6 or f4, you're really going to have some shallow depth of field. You're probably going to lose some details in the feathers there. You'll get the eye in focus. You're going to start losing detail on the back of the head. So I highly recommend f8 for small bird photographs like this. Again, this is shot in my backyard studio. We have a peach tree out there. We have a plum tree, and I take advantage of that when springtime comes. Okay, let's move on to the next image. This next image is totally unrelated to all my other work. I do enjoy, from time to time, photographing still lifes, and I don't know why I like still lifes. You know, maybe it's the just kind of this frozen in time, contrived image that kind of shows reference to something in the past or present. I don't know why I like them really. But this one is entitled Powder and Lead. Now, in a former life, I did Civil War reenacting. That was part of the 21st North Carolina Regiment here, and also part of the 7th West Virginia. And we had muskets, rifles that really worked. We had ammunition, and this is some of that ammunition you see here. What I like about this image is it really shows part of American history. You have a pine table, which could easily have been part of a high-ranking officer's supplies. They often had little pine tables or little tables in their tents. And so I like that, first of all. It's got a good background, a historic background. To the left, if your eye starts out to the left of the photograph in the left corner, we've got the mini balls kind of strewn out across the table. Your eye is then taken down. When my eye kind of travels down into the gunpowder, and we clearly see that we wouldn't necessarily know that this is gunpowder, except that in the top right corner, eye now glides up to that powder flask, and we can see now that this is a table for creating cartridges. But I like it. It's historical. The lighting is good. It's just great window lighting coming in, which again, I think if you're making a historical image, window light is great because that's what they often had back then. They didn't have, it's pretty much either a lantern or window light, I think, is what you need for these kind of images. That's my personal opinion. This image has been fairly popular. I don't want to say fair. It's been somewhat popular in the stock world. I've sold a few stock images, one recently through Alamy, which brought me a pretty good royalty. It was taken April 20th, 2015. Again, EOS 7D. The lens was my EF 51.8 Canon. Focal length 50 millimeters, of course. Aperture shutter speed 5.6 at 2 seconds. So that's a long exposure. At ISO 100, it was tripod mounted. Now, a little background on this image. This image is actually, you're probably going to look at it right away and say, how did you get so much depth of field at 5.6? Well, this image is actually not one image, but probably 5 or 6 images that are focus stacked and processed in Photoshop. Another great technique I highly recommend is stacking. Great way to get depth of field. See, if I had shot this at f11, I'd be up there at 8-second exposure. I just didn't want to go that far. I didn't want to take it to that level. Additionally, as you get closer to f16, f22, you start having diffraction problems where there's actually some blur in your image because of the way the light travels through the small aperture and over the aperture blades in your camera. So just a little tip, something to think about. Composition wise, I really like the lines in this image. You've got kind of an X formed here, or a V, by the mini balls, the powder, and the flask. It's balanced by 3 mini balls in the right corner, and I added just a hint of a handle of a knife in the top, just to kind of give it some additional framing, which I think helped the image. Moving on to the next image. This is the American Flamingo. Now, I can't take credit completely for this image in the sense that I was inspired by an image taken by Martin Bailey, and he took one of a similar image of a flamingo. I don't know if it was an American flamingo. It probably was a Chilean flamingo, but I really liked that image, and I decided to kind of create my own version of it. Again, lots of impact here. You've got the subject, of course, is the flamingo, but really the subject is his eye. If the eye is almost centered in this image. It's a little bit north of the center line. And you're drawn to that. And this is an instance where you kind of break the rules a little bit. It's okay to center an eye because there's one eye, and you're immediately just drawn to that eye. But then your eye kind of wanders from there, and you kind of start picking up just the amazing detail of this bird's feathers. It's just staggering what you can see at such a close view of this creature. I mean, and again, this is becoming really who I am as a photographer. This is my style now. This is a piece of my style, which is impact, close-ups, show the feathers, show the eyes, show what makes this bird different from all the other birds. And I think also, we're not used to seeing things like this. I think one of the reasons that images like this are liked by so many people is because our human eye doesn't generally get this close to an animal. And so we're seeing something we don't normally see. And the great thing is about shots like this, I'll just be honest with you, this is a captive bird. This was taken at a breeding center here in North Carolina called Sylvan Heights Bird Park. You don't have to be in Florida to take this shot. You don't have to be at some location halfway across the world. You can take these shots at zoos, at wildlife rehabs, all these places. And you know what? This beat my wild birds, a lot of my wild bird photographs. This won, in my opinion. And so, don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to learn. They're great places to learn how to use your gear and use it properly. I don't want to get too far down this rabbit trail. But I don't get wrapped up in this wild and free thing, okay? There's a lot of great places that are doing great work for the animal world. Um, when you look at Sylvan Heights Bird Park, for example, they are helping to repopulate birds that are on the edge of extinction. And one of the ways they pay for that is you come in and you look at the birds. It's a win-win. And so don't get wrapped up in this, oh, this bird's wild and free, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. It's wild and free, but it's still a great image regardless. Don't get sidetracked with that. Um, this was taken June 26th of 2015. It was shot with my EOS 7D. Some people say EOS, some people say EOS. I think it's actually EOS, but I don't really care. The Tamron 70 to 300 f4 to f5.6 was the lens I used. Focal length 300 millimeters, giving me. I did shoot that at 300. That's interesting. Uh, Now, the interesting thing about this is completely flash. This entire image is flash. The aperture is f14 at 1/250th of a second. That's why you have so much depth of field here. You have the head in focus, the eyes in focus, the feathers are in focus. There's very little in this photograph that's not in focus, and I think that adds impact to it because you want to see in a bird, you want to see those feather details. And there's no background to speak of here, so blurring the background is really of no value anyway. ISO 400. It was not tripod mounted, it was handheld, and like I said, I did use a flash. Okay, coming up next on the list, getting closer to the bottom here. My trip to Merritt Island led me to photograph this photograph of a tricolored heron. Now, herons are quite common actually in Florida. And it's very difficult to get an interesting photograph of a heron because most of the time they're pretty much standing in one place and kind of hunting or fishing, whatever you want to say. And they're just kind of moving through the water, and every once in a while they might strike at a fish. It's very difficult to catch them doing something unusual. And here, although this isn't unusual, we have kind of an interesting framing of this heron. What he was actually doing here was he was angry that another tricolored heron about 15 feet to the right was too close to his feeding grounds, and he was not happy about that. And he was flashing his wings, and he was doing these kind of, I call them false charges. It's kind of like a bear would do. And in this instance, he just flipped that wing up, and I caught it, so it was kind of right behind his head, and it's kind of an interesting composition, and I like it because of that. And it's other than that, it's a good image, it's sharp, but that just did something for me, and I felt like it needed to be in this list. It's not a Pulitzer Prize winning image. It's probably never going to be published, but I just like that composition, and I can't even fully explain why to you in this case. I think it's just the juxtaposition of the wing and the head and the neck and just kind of forming like an S there, and I don't know. It's just a peculiar image. I took this November 18th, 2015 on my EOS 7D. The lens was a Sigma 150 to 600 contemporary. Shot at 600 millimeters, f6.3, 1/320th of a second. Again, a higher ISO 1000. I was not tripod mounted, but I did have it resting on a beanbag for this shot. I was actually in my car with a beanbag, a grizzly beanbag kind of saddled over my door, which is a great support option, might I add. It's just a little tip there. Beanbags are great for in-car photography, or even outside your car, resting it on the hood of your car, or even on the ground. If laying on the ground with the beanbag supporting the camera, it's another great option. Beanbags, the only drawback to the beanbag is they're kind of heavy, so you're not going to be walking like 3 miles with a beanbag. Okay, on to the next portrait. Another one from my trip to Merritt Island. This is a bird I did not have any images of prior to this trip, and so this image is special to me in that respect. But again, we're back to impact. And I think this image has impact because, one, it's close. And you just don't see birds this close very often. Birds don't like people. Let's be let's be straight up honest. Birds are trying to get away from us generally. In this instance, the anhingas are a fairly interesting bird in that they get used to people pretty easy. And so, I did shoot this at 600 millimeters, but I was fairly close to this bird. He's actually vocalizing a little bit here. He's got his head tilted back, kind of giving us a little bit of a diagonal leading line, and just a good close, sharp image. And again, this is becoming my style now. Some photographers like Moose Peterson, they're against this kind of photograph. I don't want to say they're against it. It's not their style. They're more environmental. Well, I like both, but I really think that this image is part of my style, and that's part of what I did when I created this list. Is I looked for images that I thought were adding to my style, and I didn't just look for good images. I looked for images that were in that stylistic approach. So that's another thing you can think about when you're going through your list of top 10 for the year is, what what in these images do you think is adding to your style? What do you think is giving you an edge or makes you feel good about this image? Not just composition per se, but what about it? Is it the way the light strikes the subject? Is it the way the composition is? Is it close impact? Is it environmental? Do you like environmental portraits? Again, this exercise is so important because it really allows you to reflect. Just a little aside here. What happens to us is we go to a place like Merritt Island, or we go to the zoo or wherever, and we photograph and we take 400 or 500 images, 1,000 images, whatever. We come back and we go through these, and we're so psyched up and worked up because we want these images to be great, and so we're going through. Oh, I love this image. I love that image. I'm hitting 3 stars for this. I'm flagging this one, and so on. And the problem with that is you're on an adrenaline kick, and you're not really stepping back and going, okay, why do I like this image? Why do I not like this image? And at the end of the year, you can look back and say, yeah, I nailed it. This image is great, and this is why. And it's not just the heat of the moment where you think it's a good shot because you want it to be a good shot. Just a little aside there, another reason to do this exercise every year. Um, Again, this is a beanbag supported image, focal length 600 millimeters. I shot it with my Sigma 150 to 600 contemporary, ISO 400, f6.3, 1/500th of a second. Okay, moving on to the next image. Now, some of you are going to think, wow, he put a gull in his top 10 images. Gulls are so common. Why in the world would you want a picture of a gull? Well, I like this image, and I like it for a couple of reasons. I entitled it Laughing Gull with Shrimp. And I think the title helps to explain why I like it. This is indeed a common bird. This bird can be found anywhere on any eastern shore up and down the east coast of North America. But I like this image because it's a little different. You've got a picture of a gull with a shrimp in his mouth. He doesn't have a French fry from Walmart parking lot. He doesn't have some garbage that he found on the beach. And so I like that aspect. I like that he has a natural food in his mouth. And I like the fact that that shrimp is very sharp. I can see his eyes. Both of his eyes are very visible. It's a good behavior shot. It's a good feeding shot. The next reason I like it, again, impact. The whole image is a tight frame, nice gradient in the background going from the dark shoreline down through the blue water. Gives an interesting view. It contrasts against his head, his white head. a very good image in my mind. It's, again, not Pulitzer Prize winning, and that's not generally necessarily what you're going for with this top 10 list. You're not, this is your list. This is not what would sell best in the stock world or what would sell best for a magazine. This is images that you like and I think are good for specific reasons. This was taken down in South Carolina at Huntington Beach State Park, another place I highly recommend that you go if you live here on the East Coast. It's a wildlife preserve. It's a bird sanctuary. There's a lot of wading birds here. There's gulls. There's sandpipers. Um, oh my word, what else is there? There's a lot of your typical terns, um, herons, egrets, um, pelicans, primarily brown pelicans. So again, another great stop on your wildlife trail, so to speak. And two, with this image, I want you to start thinking about how do I make a common species look uncommon. If you can do that, then you're well on your way to becoming a better photographer. Go ahead and shoot images of robins. Go ahead and shoot images of gulls. Go ahead and shoot images of sparrows, because not only are you learning in the process because you're shooting and getting out there with your camera, but try to look for uncommon scenarios. Maybe a sparrow is fighting with another sparrow, or maybe the robin's got something unusual in his mouth besides a worm. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. Look for interesting situations. Yeah, you're not going to come back with that shot every time. You're going to go out there and you're going to get a lot of mundane pictures of robins or gulls. But that's not the point. The point is that one time when that gull does something weird or that robin does something weird, you're there and you're ready to photograph it. And so that's kind of what I call the photojournalism aspect of wildlife photography. It's that chance. There's always that chance that something unusual is going to happen, and I think that's what makes us want to go out there and do this every time. So, what's the specs on this image? It was taken October 19th, 2015. It was the Canon EOS 7D. Again, it was the Sigma 150 to 600 contemporary. The focal length is only 252 millimeters here, so fairly close to this bird. Aperture shutter speed is 5.6 at 1/2000th of a second. Pretty high shutter speed, ISO 160. No tripod, no flash. All right, let's move on to the last image, the 10th image in this list. This is entitled Carolina Wren in Snow. I had to put this image in here. It's just one of these images that was my favorite throughout the year. It was taken early in the year. It was taken in February of 2015. It was a fairly uncommon snow in North Carolina, so it's rare in that sense. So the snow is one aspect of this composition that I like. It's falling in the background, and actually, if you look carefully at this image, you will actually see that the bird itself has a snowflake in its beak. I first saw this and I didn't believe it, but after conferring with a friend of mine, we zoomed in to 100, 300% and looked at that snowflake, and sure enough, it's in his mouth. He was actually rooting around in that tree and got that snowflake in his mouth. And so, again, a freak weird situation. Aside from that, I like the angle of the ash tree here. It's that kind of a 45-degree angle coming off to the left. It complements the bird's angle, who's coming off at 90 degrees from that tree trunk. And this is a Carolina wren, and they're a common bird in North Carolina, but they're such a neat little bird. They're very hyper, and they crawl up and down trees looking for seeds and bugs and anything they can find. They're just a neat little bird. I just had to add this image in here for number 10. The specs on this image, it was taken on February 15th, 2015. The camera is the Canon EOS 7D. The lens is the Canon EF 70-210 f4. You may not know about this lens. This was an old lens made in 1985 or 87. Sorry. It is an f4 constant lens, believe it or not, but it was a consumer grade lens, and so if you're going to use it, you have to shoot around f8 because it's horrible at f4. And this image, because I shot with that lens, I think I was in between lenses at the time, but because I shot with that lens, this image is not technically perfect. It's not perfectly sharp at 100%. And it's because I used that lens. That lens is just not a sharp lens. But it doesn't matter to me because this image has good composition, great subject, is a winner. I just wanted to throw that out there. Sometimes you're going to have an image that's not 100% sharp, and it's okay. You can salvage that image if it's a great image. So that's it for the best images of 2015. I hope that this exercise helped you. I hope that you'll be encouraged this year to do the same thing and go through your images and pick the best ones, because I really think, and I can't take credit for this top 10. I've seen other photographers do this, and I've just kind of thought it was a great idea and just started doing it myself. This is the first podcast episode that I've done with it, but I think you get the point. Welcome to the Know Your Subject segment of the podcast. In this segment, we're going to take one animal species, we're going to discuss how the animal behaves, and how you can use this information to make your wildlife photography better. Because I truly believe that in order to be a better wildlife photographer, you've got to know your subject, and you have to know what to expect from that subject. The sound you just heard was that of the eastern bluebird. Cornell's Lab of Ornithology defines the bluebird as a small thrush with a big, rounded head, large eye, plump body, and alert posture. The wings are long, but the tail and legs are short. The bill is short and straight. Male eastern bluebirds are vivid, deep blue above and rusty or brick red on the throat and breasts. Blue in birds always depends on the light, and males often look plain gray-brown from a distance. Females are grayish above with bluish wings and tail and a subdued orange-brown breast. Some interesting facts about the eastern bluebird. The male bluebird will pick out its nesting location and will actually woo prospective females by flapping his wings and carrying various nesting material into the nest. From that point on, the male bluebird is not involved in nest building. Eastern bluebirds mostly eat insects. They will eat wild fruit and berries. And the longest bluebird on record lived 10 years. A little over 10 years, actually. So let's move on to a little more important information, like how do I attract the eastern bluebird? Bluebirds are different in the fact that you cannot attract them by simply putting out some bird seed. Bluebirds require insects or berries, and insects are primarily their food of choice. And they primarily feed on these insects on the ground. And so you can have maybe some luck trying to bring them in with food, but generally how I bring them into my backyard studio is I will first put up a nesting box. Now, bluebird nesting boxes can be purchased at just about any home improvement store or department store. They're easy to install, and bluebirds love them. If you have bluebirds in the area, I can guarantee you they will at least check it out, if not use it. And once they're in there nesting, what you want to do is you want to put up some kind of bird bath. They love water, and you can lure them and keep them there with the water. I generally don't use food to lure them. I've tried using dried worms and like dried mealworms. That doesn't work. I've heard that you can use canned mealworms, and that has been effective. But so far, I've been okay with just putting up nest boxes. And what you want to do as far as photography tips go for this subject, you want to have your nest box facing kind of a northern direction. And what I'll do is I'll put a perch just outside the nest box when I'm photographing. And what they'll do is they'll go out, both the female and male will go out, and they'll get insects, and they'll land on that perch right in front of the nesting box, just long enough to get a shot of them. And you can oftentimes get shots of them with an insect in their mouth, or a worm, or a spider, or something like that. So there's that. There's that way to photograph them, and that's the way that I use. So just a little tip there. Well, I hate to say it, but that brings us to the end of this episode. On the next episode, I believe we're going to look at my trip to Merritt Island, and it's going to be kind of rough. It's going to be just, I recorded my whole trip through a portion of Merritt Island, and so it's going to be kind of rough and unedited, but I think you might enjoy it and might get something out of it. It's going to be kind of a travel log episode. So I wanted to leave you with another quote from L.L. Rue III. If I were to ever take a vacation, I would do just what I'm doing now, photographing wildlife. Thanks for listening. Make it a great day, and get out there and enjoy nature. Bye-bye. Music for this episode was provided by Dr. Turtle.